This is Jeffrey Jones, also known as Triple J, coming to you with the Community Podcast. What we say community is only common unity. That is the tie between you and I. The tie for all, the tie that binds us, the tie that makes us, the tie that makes us whole. Thank you for being here with us for this common unity. I would like to thank each and every one of you for coming to spend time with us today here at the Common Unity Podcast. Today, I have a very special guest. His name is Reverend Jimmy L. Reeder, and he's a person who's advocated for communications and cooperation of all the folks in this nation. He's done so for a while, and he's continuing to do so. And we need more people like Reverend Reeder if we're going to make this thing work. So I'd like to share some things with you, the audience, today that Reverend Reeder is working on and has worked on. And I think you'll find them very interesting. Welcome, Reverend Reeder. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
It's a blessing to have you here. One of the things that I know you and I wanted to talk about today was we wanted to talk about disinformation and misinformation, the divisiveness that it causes through the media as they propagate this type of bad information. What do you think about that, and what are some of the things we can do about that?
I do think that fighting against disinformation and misinformation is almost a losing battle at some end. I mean, at some level, because there's just so much of it out there, and a lot of people do have a tendency to listen to only certain channels of information, whether it's by way of video on a network like Rumble, or if it's on one of the like Newsmax or Daily Caller or anything like that. And if that's all they listen to, and that's their only source of information, then they're going to get a steady stream of a lot of what I would call conspiracy theories and or a lot of what I would consider to be misinformation, if not disinformation. So I'm not quite sure what to do about that. I wish I did. I don't know how to control that part of it. I think that what we have to do is we have to focus on the person or the people right in front of us that we're talking with, and invite them into a conversation where hopefully we can get them to consider something other than that steady stream of information.
That is a very, very informed line of reasoning that you're using, because some people, no matter what you say, once they've begun to follow certain news stations, that's all they want to hear. A lot of it, I think, stems from it feeds into what some people already believe. And once they believe something, they'd rather be reinforced in their beliefs than to step out and have to rethink some things. I just don't feel everybody's comfortable in rethinking and analyzing and taking different points of view and putting things together. That brings me to another question that I have for you. And this one is about perceptions. The first book that I wrote, it dealt a lot with perceptions.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for a fact that individuals can sit and hear the same set of facts,
Mm-hmm.
but depending on their perception, they come to totally different conclusions.
Right.
So, I mean, in order to make it work, I think people have to respect each other's opinions and communicate in a way where there's civil discourse. How do we affect that?
Well, I do think perspective is really the key. You know, a lot of evangelical Christians use a phrase all the time, a biblical worldview. And as a Baptist pastor for 53 years now, I know that what they're saying is not the only way to read the Bible, right? But worldview, the way we view the world, that's really the key. whether we disagree about the facts of what they're saying or the interpretation of the Bible, are the way in which we view the world really is the key. Because as you say, no two people hear or see something and interpret it quite the same way. I've often used an example of if there's an accident in the middle of an intersection and there are four people, one on each corner, all four people are going to give you a way of seeing that accident that they saw that is going to be somewhat different from somebody standing on another corner. So even just at that basic level, where we're standing, what we see, what we're inclined to bring to it, it may be that one of those people was involved in a similar accident, and they bring their experience to interpreting this experience. So the matter of perspective or worldview is really, I think, the key. And that's probably the key to all the work that I'm doing, is understanding why we have different worldviews. Why do people see the world in such a different way? And so that's what I'm working on. Would you like me to go into that a little bit?
I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. I discovered a man named George Lakoff. He retired just a few years ago from UC Berkeley, and he's a cognitive scientist. His work has been in the area of how the brain works and how we talk and communicate based on all of that. And back in the mid-90s, he wrote a book called Moral Politics. And then in the early 2000s, he wrote kind of a smaller book, almost a summary of the first one, called Don't Think of an Elephant. And the reason he picked that title is that if I say to you, don't think of an elephant, what comes to your mind?
Elephant?
Right, exactly. And that's the key to the way a lot of people communicate, the messaging that they do. They use the words and phrases and the metaphor behind it that causes the other person to see and think the way they want to do it. So what he did in his work is that he introduced two basic ways of seeing the world. And he put it he used family metaphors. And he called one a strict father metaphor and the other one nurturant parent metaphor. And for strict father, he used what has historically been a very common way of understanding family life. The father's in charge. The father's a man, of course, so the man is in charge. And the man, especially in a religious arena, probably any religion, but in Christianity as well, historically and traditionally, the man was in charge of the whole family, and whatever the father said is what went. His rules. He was the one that disciplined people. He expected responsibility the way he wanted the responsibility. And other people were supposed to listen to him. The other metaphor of the nurturing parent is one that has developed really, it's always been there, but it's probably been developed more in more recent decades. And that is the idea that a family is more than just the father, and both mother and father, male and female, anyone in the family can help provide nurturing care for the children. And if they provide nurture and love, they can guide, they can help lead children as they grow up to accept responsibility and to discipline themselves, learn how to discipline themselves in a way that fits the kind of world that they have been teaching. If you use those basic two metaphors, it's not just binary thinking, because he talks about this, that there's certainly a continuum. There are at times when I'm probably more of a strict father, especially with my dog when he misbehaves, right? But generally, I tend to be more the nurturant parent. But we can go either way depending on the context that we're working in or how we feel in the moment. But basically, it's two different ways of seeing the world. And so the strict father way of seeing the world generally is to probably instill fear. Don't you dare do what that, or you know what's going to happen to you, right? And people who live with that worldview, they operate out of fear and out of control, out of an authoritarian view of the way the world should work. Somebody has to be in charge. People who operate with the metaphor of a nurturing parent operate more out of compassion and empathy or love, perhaps. And they're no less concerned about responsibility and discipline than a strict father person, but they understand that it comes, it's better if that discipline and responsibility comes out of compassion and empathy for other people as well as for themselves. Those two different ways of seeing the world are responsible for basic theologies in the Christian religion. You know, there's a way some people go to the Bible, all they see is fear and authority, and somebody has to control other people. Somebody has to be in charge of the nation. Somebody has to be in charge of the church, you know. And in the Southern Baptist Church, we've just learned that over the last couple of weeks. It remains that only men can be in charge of the church in a Southern Baptist church, right? Nurturing parent folks come to the Bible and they're looking for compassion, empathy, love. And as a nurturing parent, as a person who operates with that worldview, I read the Bible and I find compassion. I find kindness and generosity on the part of God, on the part of the people of God, if they're living up to what God wants. And I think you see those two metaphors in operation, those two worldviews, if you will, in any religion or among people of no particular religion. It's not just a religious way of looking at the world. I don't know if George Lakoff is religious or not. It doesn't come out of that for him. But it does come out of the question of what is moral. You know, what is moral? Some people think things are moral that I think are immoral, and vice versa, right? And so our worldview, our way of seeing the world, what we expect the world to be, makes all the difference when it comes to trying to talk with other people.
Oh, that is absolutely true. And I don't see how individuals could, but then there's that perspective again, because when I look at God, if he's willing to give his only son for us, how could you say he's not generous? I mean, that's beyond generosity. But you have individuals who, like you said, they don't believe that he is or was. But I look at the things that we operate on now,
Mhm.
and I think a lot of our nature is to be more self-serving than communal. And when we're in that mode, it tends to lead us towards the wrong path. Now
Mhm.
we want to be materialistic. We don't tend to care about the needs of others as long as our needs are satisfied, and that's
Mhm.
a bad thing. I mean, how much can a community grow when individuals aren't concerned about the community?
Mhm.
So I look at it from that perspective, and I always try to be inclusive of everyone around me. And
Mhm.
you never know what an individual truly can bring to the table until you give them an opportunity. And in
Mhm.
many cases, we don't give that opportunity. We may not like the way someone sounds. We may not like the way they dress. We may not like the color of their skin. And that stops us from opening up our hearts, opening up our ears, and opening up our eyes.
Right.
So all those things are closed, the mind is closed. And you can't change something like that that's closed. So I think what you just explained was very good way to put it.
So when it comes to actually entering into conversation with people, um, I think what I heard you saying there a minute ago is really about listening, being willing to stop talking and listen to the other person, and then ask open-ended questions of the other person that invites them to say more about what they're thinking. So if I'm listening and my first reaction to what the person said is to say, well, that's just not true, it's going to be more helpful to the conversation if I say, you know, I might have a different way of seeing that, but I'd like to hear more about why you say that, or what you're thinking when you say these words. So what I heard you say is this, is that what you meant? And if it is, could you tell me more about that? And if you do that, if you participate in that kind of if you do that kind of listening and that kind of invitational listening and drawing the person into the conversation and show that you're willing to listen to the other person, we'll at least get a little farther than we might have if we're just back and forth about what we think and what we don't think. So I think that's one key to this conversation. I think another is drawing upon those two metaphors and the idea of perspective and worldview, is to invite the person to talk about it at maybe even a deeper level. So after you've listened to them a little bit, you might say something like, you know, the way I see the world. I mean, I use this language in the conversation. You know, the way I see the world, it seems to me that the world really ought to be about compassion, about empathy, about respect and kindness toward other people. So does that sound right to you? I mean, is that how you see the world? And get the person to begin to say, well, no, I don't agree with that. Most people aren't going to say that they don't agree with compassion and love, you know. So if you can draw them in, get them to saying yes to something, well, sure, yeah, I believe in, I'm sure we ought to love other people, you know, that you can draw that into. So when I think about compassion and empathy for other people, talking about what we've just been talking about, this is what I might say to the other person. Then this is kind of how I might see that situation, and what I might want to see come out of that kind of situation. What do you think about that? So it's not a back and forth what we believe. It's inviting the person into conversation, expressing a little bit of what I think based on the way I see the world. If the person wants to, you know, get drawn into what the Bible says and all of that, my experience is that doesn't get us anywhere. Because back to the idea of interpreting the Bible, we interpret it differently based on what we expect the world to be like and what we expect to find there. If I expect to find fear in the Bible, I can find that all over the place. If I expect to find hope in the Bible, I can certainly find that as well. Or if I find unkindness and a lack of generosity, if I find people who are hard on other people, I can find that all over the Bible. But I can also find love and generosity and compassion and empathy and all of that. So I think involving people in that kind of a conversation might at least get us a little farther if they are willing to do that.
I think so. And one of the things that I looked at over the past couple of weeks is I went to your website
Mhm.
and I looked at your blog, and it was amazing. I mean, anybody who's willing to participate and keep an open mind, I
Mhm.
think would do themselves a great justice to
Mhm.
take a peek at your blog and interact with what's actually going on.
Yeah.
What made you decide to open that venue up to everyone?
In my blog and on my website.
Yes, sir.
Well, if people go to the website, they'll quickly see right on the homepage that the focus of it is trying to understand how to deal with the dangers to democracy that we see in our world right now. And a part of that, not all of it, a part of that is what has come to be called Christian nationalism. I've been dealing with that probably all my life in some ways, but about back in 2004, 2005, I wrote a book called Moral Values: What I Learned Growing Up in Church, and I tried to deal with some of the things that are at issue in churches today and in our nation, like abortion or homosexuality. Back in 2004, that's how we talked, how the language that we used. So I wrote a book about that, and then I discovered on a place called Theocracy Watch, I discovered that there are all kinds of things going on in the world that at that point in time, I really didn't even realize about where the religious right was taking us. And so I got drawn into that. And so much so that I decided in 2007 or 8, I think I had put together a workshop, was trying to teach it about the dangers of the religious right. And nobody wanted to come because everyone who didn't like the religious right thought it was over and done with. They thought it was gone, or on its way out. And look where we are now. It's only grown and grown and grown all the more. So then over the last 3 or 4 years, I started coming across all kinds of books that were where I learned things, again, that I didn't know about why all this is happening and how there's a 50-year history of moneyed people behind all the things that we see happening right now. One of those books is How the South Won the Civil War, and it's about how the worldview, to use that language, of the pre-Civil War South never went anywhere. It just kind of got underneath the movement westward in our nation, and it continued to spread. That whole strict father metaphor, that way of seeing the world, and the idea that maybe some people are less than other people because of the color of their skin, for instance. That whole thing just moved west, and it's a fascinating book. And then I discovered some other books that dug into the history and the current current events and things that are happening in what's come to be called Christian nationalism. One is by Kathleen Stewart, The Rise of Christian Nationalism, and she goes into depth. She went to all their meetings and their conferences, and and interviewed people, talked with people, and puts that into her book to show that this is what people are thinking who are in that circle of that's all they hear. They hear from the pulpit for the churches they go to. They listen to all the same videos and TV programs and on and on and on. And those are the people who elected Donald Trump in 2016 and tried to elect him again, and they're still there. So I think maybe that's diminishing, but their support, but I don't know that for a fact. But anyway, there's a whole movement there, and part of what I deal with on my website and in my blog is I try to help people understand that there is a specific movement. The people who are caught up in that movement are not all of one mind. And even though they may listen to the same sources of information and say the same things out loud, when you get them one-on-one, you find some people who are willing to be drawn out and to begin to think about other ways of seeing the world, to begin to learn a different story about what's happening in the world, or that kind of a thing. And I think if we can distinguish between the movement and the individuals that we're talking with, who maybe are in the movement but might be persuaded, if they learn a different story, if they hear a different narrative, if if they hear somebody talk about a different way of seeing the world than what they've been taught, they might be persuaded to make a change in the way that they're living and whether or not they follow in that movement. So those are the kinds of things that I write about on my blog, and I have some interviews on the website. I'm putting together a series of coaching tapes, audio tape. They're not tapes, of course, digital files, now, but that are by way of coaching, helping people to develop the skills and the background, the information that they need to be able to talk with people in this way. So that's what my work is about at this point in time.
That work is sorely needed, and I appreciate the fact that you're putting in so much effort to get it out there and share it with everyone. We are really at a dangerous place in our own society right now. I look at some of the rulings that have come down from the Supreme Court lately and what's going on, and I have to think. I put myself in other people's shoes to make it work sometimes.
Right.
And I think if I'm a Christian and I send my children to school and they go to a school and they have to pray to another deity from another religion and show deference to that, how would I feel?
Right.
So, how do other children feel from other religions when they go to a public school and we force them to believe like we believe, or at least act like they believe what we believe? It's got to be a better way.
Right.
Separation of church and state has been a long accepted premise of what we are as a nation.
Right.
But you have those people who want to blur those lines. And that's not a good thing. If we're going to be a nation of rules and laws, and we respect each other and love each other, then we have to respect and love each other for who we are,
right,
and not who we might want someone to be.
Right.
I find it very dangerous where we're at right now, where you have so many people who believe that they should be able to force their belief system on someone else.
Right.
That's truly not the right way to go. And I look at your work and your blog, and I have much respect for what you're doing and what you've done.
Yeah, I've come to use the words authoritarian and compassionate to describe these two different worldviews and the way people live their lives. Some people live their lives in an authoritarian way. Some people live it in a compassionate way. You talked about putting myself in someone else's shoes. That's compassion. That's empathy. But an authoritarian doesn't need to do that. An authoritarian just needs to say, this is how you're supposed to live. And so now they're passing laws, as you've talked about. So in certain states, people with an authoritarian view of the world think that it's up to them to pass laws to enforce what they consider to be a correct morality, the way people ought to live according to their views. And what's truly dangerous, is that so many of these people root their ideas of morality in their faith.
Hello, everyone. This is Sandra Jones, co-founder of Community Podcasts. I'd like to say thank you to all our listeners and viewers. We're asking for positive vibes only. Thank you and have a great day.